tonight's panel: Charlie Savage, Washington correspondent for the New York Times and an MSNBC contributor; Maria Teresa Kumar, president of Voto Latino and also an MSNBC contributor; and George Will, syndicated columnist and an MSNBC contributor, and somebody I plan on seeing a lot over the next 5 days as we celebrate the Major League All-Star Game coming to Washington. Welcome, guys. George Will, I'm going to start with the White House's reaction to today, because my EP and I both remembered Watergate, and there's a great line when Bob Woodward, the character of Robert Redford, is asking, and he's talking about, he goes, did you call the White House? His editor asked him, and he says, well, I did, and da-da-da, and he said, and the White House said, Mr. Colson or anyone else at the White House had any knowledge or participated in the deplorable incident at the Democratic National Committee? And his editor says, well, what'd you expect? And he goes, I didn't ask about that. That's what this White House response reminded me of. Also, the devil is in the adjectives. In the statement the White House released, they said no one had any knowing involvement. Now, I don't know why they felt they need to put that in there, but it's fair to make an inference. I just don't get why the first response isn't, oh, my God. Well, because the president thinks it is axiomatic that good relations, meaning smooth and amicable relations with Russia, are a good thing. And that's not obviously true. The Edward Snowden, when Russia gave Edward Snowden asylum, Maria, it was within days, I think, that President Obama canceled a planned summit with Putin. So there is actually precedent for this. I mean, well, the fact that for any foreign government to interfere into our election system or even attempt to, and for a White House, regardless of party, not to be basically saying the House is on fire and this is not acceptable is shocking. The fact that the Republican leadership is not basically calling foul is also shocking. And the fact that it's only right now Democrats is concerning. What is happening right now to our election system, the integrity of our election system, that is what encourages people to participate. Our democracy is so strong as long as the American people believe that when they cast a vote, it's going to be counted and no one's going to mess with it. And that is a huge challenge. I guess, Charlie, the thing that I'm stuck on is there's actually a political case to be made that it's actually in the president's best interest not to do this summit. That for appearance's sake, going through with it looks like you're winking and nodding, showing some outrage and, that you're upset and you sort of get rid of the spotlight. It embarrasses him internationally. That would be a way of punishing him. That would be, though, a step that would be premised on accepting this indictment as true, on the findings in it as real, as this is not a witch hunt, or if it's a witch hunt, there really are witches out there. I think Trump and the Trump Republican establishment that is united around him, that we saw on display in those House hearings yesterday as well, and in much of the conservative media world, is at this point locked in a way that it cannot pull out of from the narrative that there's nothing to this. The whole thing is a false, rigged witch hunt dreamed up by partisans, and every American should pay no attention to this. So were Trump to say, oh, this is terrible, now I'm outraged, I'm going to cancel with Putin, he would be discrediting his last year of strategy, and his strategy instead is just to keep doubling down and tripling down. So the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coats, gave a speech today where he was asked what would he say to Putin at this summit? How would he deal with this? He gave an answer. Take a listen. My message would be, we know what you're doing, and we know you know what you're doing and what we are doing. We know you run the shop. We know you're making the decisions. You can't pass it off to, oh, that's some hacker down somewhere where we don't know. We know what you do, and so you make the choice. But if you want to stay in this tit for tat, we're going to beat you. Well, and I think that's, what he's saying is also saying that there's going to be consequences. The idea that not only is the president going to meet with Putin without leveled consequences is an issue, but when you start digging at the tentacles that Russia has, it looks like they've also interfered in Brexit. It looks like they may have also interfered more recently in the Mexican election. This is widespread, and we need American leadership to step up and saying, not on our watch, that you will feel the blow of the American people if something happens, of the government. This is not in President Trump's DNA, but why aren't more Republicans telling him, just get out of this meeting? Just get out. I assume Bolton, like the John Bolton we know from 5 years ago would tell him to get out, right? The John Bolton we knew from 5 years ago is gone. Talk about Republican leadership. There's one Republican leader, and the rest are followers, and they're all following the president. Period. There's no independent congressional at all rival this institution at all. You know what was interesting today was when Rod Rosenstein, and I felt like, I'll tell you how I heard it.
when his call for bipartisanship, it was essentially to me hinting at there's a bigger shoe that's going to drop, and it's going to be rough. And we're going to need true leadership to deal with it. First of all, just listen to what he said.
I want to caution you, the people who speculate about federal investigations usually do not know all of the relevant facts. We do not try cases on television or in congressional hearings.
Just today, the president described the Mueller investigation as a witch hunt. Your response?
I only comment on the evidence. The evidence that is reflected in our indictments and in our charges represents a determination by prosecutors and agents, without regard to politics, that we believe the evidence is sufficient to justify the charges.
My apologies. That was a lengthier clip. Let me read the quote in particular that he also added. It's important for us to avoid thinking politically as Republicans or Democrats and instead to think patriotically as Americans. Our response must not depend on which side was victimized. He's trying, George.
Right.
Well, go back to what Mr. Coates said. Mr. Coates was saying, in effect, in coded language, but not deeply coded, that this is a form of warfare, and deterrence, mutual assured destruction, if you will, obtains. And he was speaking for a nation, ours, that has used cyber warfare before, as the Iranians can attest.
Yes.
Stuxnet.
No, we opened up this box.
Right. Yeah, when you have cyber capacities, it can do to a country what it used to take fleets of World War II bombers to do, that is to actually destroy physical infrastructure. That was a pretty strong statement by the Director of Intelligence, who is not, however, the man who is authorized to unleash this weapon.
Charlie, I mean, I think part of the problem is, and what you would, and I think the two gentlemen that I'm going to have on the show later, former CIA Director John Brennan and the former Attorney General Eric Holder, who both would say the problem is it isn't mutually assured. We're actually more vulnerable on cyber than Russia is.
Well, certainly when you're talking about kinetic destruction of material using cyber attacks, which is the reference to our use of a cyber attack to destroy Iranian centrifuges in their nuclear plant at Natanz. But there's a second kind of cyber warfare, which is information warfare, which is actually what would be the tit for tat here in terms of leaking, hacking and leaking materials that disrupted the election. Remember that we didn't pay that much attention to it here in the United States, but there was a massive hack of financial documents known as the Panama Papers, which revealed a lot of hidden wealth, including of a lot of Putin-linked oligarchs. And we think that Putin blames us for that. We don't know who that hack was.
Yeah, you know why he blames us? Because there was no Americans. There was like, what, 4 Americans total referenced in the Panama Papers, and it conveniently didn't have any other Americans. I understand why Vladimir Putin thinks it was the United States.
So there may already be some tats for the tit that we're seeing here. Right. This is not something that just began with 2016, but that may be more what Dan Coates is hinting at than making something blow up in Russia.
So what happens? What are the consequences? If he goes in at this point, if you look at NATO's worst fears were realized. He came in and disrupted the meeting. Theresa May's worst fears were realized. He came in and essentially attempted to, I think, push her out and then realized, oh, nobody wants to be prime minister right now.
That's called interfering in another person's election.
Right, exactly.
So,
taking it from others.
Do we assume the worst case scenario here that some people fear with Trump and Putin, in that Crimea is, that Trump's going to show openness on Crimea, say, hey, Syria's yours, your mess, I don't want a part of it?
Well, if he did that, that would have serious consequences on the sanctions against Russia, which were put in to penalize them for Crimea. But we've already seen the president return from the summit in Singapore with the North Korean leader and say, well, the problem's gone. And the Chinese instantly said, fine, then the sanctions can be relaxed. So there is precedent for that, too.
I think what he's trying to do is basically put us back into the last century where every country was basically acting alone. He feels that America's prowess will be stronger by itself so that we can individually negotiate with Russia and China. It's a different world that we're living in. And we have to remember that we actually helped craft NATO. We crafted international alliances so that we can leverage the globalization and actually have a lot of meat when we go into negotiation rooms.
Well, it's not just alliances for the purpose of having a lot of allies at your side. Part of the world that he's dismantling is the world of the international rule of law and constraint that binds the hands of the great powers, including the United States, but that the United States generation after World War II saw as ultimately strengthening the United States and in its own interest, that the great powers would respect constraints, and that and I think that Trump sees the world very differently. I think he respects strength and does not like constraint in many different respects.
He's not a small government guy. He's a strong government guy. That's for sure. All right. Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.